Hi, I'm horror author Paul Edwards. Tonight I'm watching The Thing from 1982. In 1938, John Campbell published a story called Who Goes There? It's a story set at the South Pole at a scientific base where the scientists excavate from the ice a frozen space alien. And when they thaw it out, it turns out the alien is still alive. It's a shapeshifter, and it begins to copy members of the crew and slowly infiltrate their ranks. And it's a story of paranoia because the crew doesn't know which among them is a real person and which among them is an alien imposter. And there are 37 members to the crew, so there are a lot of suspects. In 1951, a film adaptation was made of this story. It was a movie called The Thing. The Thing was a great monster movie, one of the best monster movies of the 1950s. But it really wasn't the Who Goes There story. They changed all those story elements I just told you. The action was moved to the North Pole instead of the South Pole. They changed it from a scientific base to a military base. And most importantly, they took out the story element that the alien was a shapeshifter. They just made it an alien monster that had been thawed out from the ice and was on the rampage. So gone was the paranoia and the distrust of not knowing which of the characters was a real person and which was a monster. In 1982, John Carpenter made this film, a much more faithful adaptation of Who Goes There? And in this film, the action is moved back to the South Pole. The characters from the original story are back, MacReady and Blair and everybody. And most importantly, the alien retains its shape-shifting nature. It's able to copy and replace human beings. And the paranoia is pervasive in this story because you never know who among the characters on the screen at any given moment is a real person and who among them is an alien monster. This film was not a success when it came out. It was actually a flop. I'm not sure why. I think one factor might have been that the practical effects were considered a little much for the time, although they were really well done. But over the years, this film has developed much more of a following, and now it's considered one of the best monster movies of the 1980s. This has happened with other movies before. A great example is Alfred Hitchcock's film Vertigo. When Vertigo came out, people hated it. They thought it was the worst thing Hitchcock had ever done. Now it's considered one of the greatest movies ever made in the United States. So sometimes a movie will find an audience later than the audience that it was intended for. This film has spawned sequels, follow-ups, and so forth. There was a comic book series that continued the story from the 1982 movie. There was a video game based on the 1982 movie. There was a 2011 film starring Mary Elizabeth Winstead, which was a prequel set earlier in 1982, and it showed the events at the original Norwegian base that led up to the events at the opening of the 1982 film. It's interesting because I went to high school with a girl who grew up to become some kind of special geologist, and she actually did move to the South Pole and spent a year at a scientific base in Antarctica. So, Sarah, if you're watching this, I hope your year at the South Pole went better than Mary Elizabeth Winstead's. This film, the 1982 film, does a great job of recapturing the paranoia of not knowing who is who, which is the essence of the Who Goes There story. And this same principle has been used in other science fiction stories like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where human beings are replaced by alien lookalikes and you have to try to figure out who is who. I broached this kind of horror story in my book, Mourners Tour, which is actually my favorite of my own books. This is my favorite of the books that I have written. In Mourners Tour, Gail Bitterman has led her church women's group into Mourners Woods for a campout over Labor Day weekend. But this isn't an ordinary church retreat. This group has come out to support one of their members, Jennifer Simmons. Jen disappeared in this forest for 2 weeks last summer, and she's never spoken about what happened out here. Now she's returned to confront her fears, and the whole group is here to support her. But their women's group is about to experience Jen's horror for themselves. Their campsite is besieged by cryptwalkers, short for cryptid skinwalkers. These are creatures that kill humans and large animals, hollow out their bodies, and wear their hides or skins as costumes. They have a gift for vocal mimicry. They can mimic animal and human speech. And they are able, with those talents, to impersonate members of this camp group. One by one, they lure members of the group away from the others, kill them, skin them, and wear their hides to impersonate them and infiltrate the group to lure the next person out. So my story is very much a story of paranoia in the vein of Who Goes There, where you are never sure which characters are really who they say they are and which characters are monsters. Which campers have been replaced by these ghoulish creatures? Is it tough Amber, wisecracking Nancy, superstitious Delise? Gail has to try to keep Jen safe by figuring out which of their friends has been replaced by one of these sinister imposters. Betrayal always wears the face of a friend. Mourners Tour is my shot at a Who Goes There style story, although obviously not set at the polls, but in an isolated location of Mourners Woods. All right, everything that I've told you up to now is spoiler-free. I'm going to end, though, with a spoiler. I'm going to give you a spoiler warning for the 1982 film. So I'm assuming you've seen the 1982 film from here, okay? Here's how you can tell who is really a human being and who's really an alien at the end, in the final scene, where it's just down to MacReady and Childs. Look closely at that scene. You can see MacReady's breath. It's Antarctica. You should be able to see human breath. Every time they cut to MacReady, you can see his breath clearly. Every time they cut back to Childs and Childs is talking, there's not a wisp of vapor. Childs is an alien. My books, the Mourners Woods books, are available on Amazon. My name again is Paul Edwards. Thanks for letting me talk to you about The Thing, 1982. I'll see you in Mourners Woods.